For most of my 41 years, I've played it safe, kept my head down. I raised my daughter, paid the bills, and always kept the peace. My daughter Ella is 17 and everything I wasn't at her age, full of courage. Last year she offered to cook the entire birthday dinner for my mother. 23 guests, a full-course meal, all by herself. She spent 3 days prepping, staying up late to research everyone's dietary needs, even hand-piping the cake decorations. The morning of the party, she was up before the sun, tying her apron and curling her hair. By late afternoon, the house smelled of rosemary and baked citrus, and the table looked like it belonged in a magazine.
10 minutes before guests were due, my father texted, "Change of plans. We're doing dinner at the Laurel. Adults only."
No apology, no explanation. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever watched someone you love give their all, only to be completely dismissed. I grew up just outside Asheville, in a house where appearances trumped feelings. My parents smiled for photos, paid for dance classes, and hosted holiday dinners with pressed linens and matching wine glasses. My sister Allison always got the applause. I was told to clean up quietly afterward. My mom liked things neat, my dad liked things predictable. So, I learned to make myself small to keep everything running smoothly. When I met Will, everything shifted. He wasn't flashy. He worked with his hands just like me. We opened a home goods store downtown. He carved, I painted. We earned enough to live, and we raised Ella to believe her ideas mattered, even if no one cheered. She started baking at 9, hosting dinner nights for her stuffed animals before she was even tall enough to reach the counter without a stool. I never pushed her, but she kept going. She devoured cookbooks like other kids read fantasy novels, memorized plating techniques, and studied flavors like a second language. When she turned 17, she announced, "I want to cook Grandma's birthday dinner this year, all of it." I warned her it was a lot of work, 23 people, some picky, some difficult. But she was resolute. "I want to show them what I can do." So, I stepped back and let her plan. She spent 3 days preparing, shopping, chopping, testing sauces, rewriting the menu twice. She took notes on who was vegetarian, who had allergies, who disliked onions. She even piped 2 trial cakes before settling on a lavender and white chocolate design. That morning she woke up before sunrise, determined that everything be perfect. I helped her iron the cloth napkins. She meticulously placed hand-lettered name cards beside every plate. The daffodils on the table were her choice. "They look like happy trumpets," she'd said. The whole house glowed with warmth. It was her first big dinner, and she had built it from scratch. I was in the dining room when the text came in, "Change of plans. We're doing dinner at the Laurel. Adults only." No punctuation, no apology, just that. Ella hadn't seen it yet. She was still in the kitchen checking on the pear tarts. It took me a second read to grasp what had happened. 10 minutes before the guests were to arrive, my father sent that group text. I stood by the dining room window, watching the last of the evening light fall across the table Ella and I had spent hours arranging. She was still in the kitchen, adjusting the oven temperature for the pear tarts. We had 23 place settings, hand-lettered name cards in gold, fresh daffodils in glass jars, and just like that the house went quiet. The air still smelled of roasted garlic and citrus glaze. Ella had been up before sunrise to curl her hair and double-check every dietary note: vegan, gluten-free, sugar-free. Her apron had a smudge of ganache across the front, and she'd been humming some jazz tune she liked to play while she worked. I walked into the kitchen, phone still in hand, unsure how to tell her. She looked up, bright-eyed, holding a tray of candied citrus slices. "Do you think Grandma will like the lemon glaze?" she asked. I nodded. "It's perfect, sweetheart." I stared down at the screen again. My father's message sat there like a paperweight. Then the photo came through. My sister's kids at a long restaurant table, already halfway through their meals. My mother raising a glass of wine, my father mid-lap, menu still in hand. My stomach churned. I called him. It rang twice. He answered cheerfully. "You get the message?" "You're not coming?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat.
No, we just changed plans. It was easier this way.
We're already at the restaurant. You're there now? Yep, just sat down. Menu. Looks great. Ella's been cooking for 3 days, I said. You said we'd host it here. She made food for 23 people. He paused. Well, tell her not to take it personally. She can freeze the leftovers, right? Gotta go. The line went dead. When I turned around, Ella was standing in the doorway, her hands still smudged with powdered sugar. She looked from my face to the phone. Wait, she said slowly. They're not coming? I didn't answer. She walked over, took the phone gently from my hand, and opened the thread. She saw the message, then the photo. Her cousin smiling. Over steak and soda, my mother looking perfectly styled. My dad lifting a glass of Cabernet. She stared for too long. Then she walked back into the kitchen, looked at the cake 3 layers, lavender frosting, white chocolate curls, and whispered, "We should throw it all out." I shook my head. Not this time. She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just stood there, her fingers twitching at her sides, unsure whether to hug the cake or smash it. Her breathing was fast but shallow, her shoulders moving more than her face. That kind of quiet breaks deeper than noise. I'm fine, she said too quickly. It's just food, right? But it wasn't just food. It was the hand-piped ganache, the dietary adjustments she stayed up researching. The sugar-free tart she made for Grandma's diabetic neighbor who hadn't even our SVPD. It was do you think they'll like it? She'd asked me all week, I called. My mother, she answered on the first ring. Hello, did you really just not come? I asked. She sighed. Claire, don't start. We planned this for weeks. We just thought it would be more convenient. She made this for you. She's 17, I said. She brushed me off. She's not a professional. It's sweet, but it's not real cooking. I hung up before I yelled. Then I called my sister. I needed to believe maybe she hadn't known. Maybe she hadn't been in on it. But she was. Claire, she said, her voice all fake calm. Don't guilt everyone over this. Ella's being dramatic. She needs to learn not everything's about her. We didn't want to be her test subjects. Test subjects? I stood in the hallway still holding the phone. In the kitchen, Ella was adjusting the lighting, flipping the dimmer back and forth like any of it still mattered. Do you think it's too warm in here? She asked, not meeting my eyes. I didn't want it to feel fake fancy, but I also didn't want cafeteria. She looked at me, then glanced down at my phone. She reached for it again. I didn't stop her. She scrolled, saw the photo again. Her cousins already eating, my mom's perfect hair, my dad's wine, and this time, something broke. Not her voice. Not a scream, just her face folding in like a curtain falling from a rail, quiet and final. She placed the phone on the counter like it might shatter, then looked at the cake again. She'd candied those violets herself, practiced the piping on cardboard dummies until she got it just right. I thought, she started, then stopped. I thought they'd at least try it. I stepped toward her, arms ready, but she stepped back. She wiped the counter again, then again, even though it was already clean. Her eyes were somewhere else.
And in
that moment, watching her shrink like that, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not anger, something harder, something that held its shape, resolve. They didn't just skip a meal, they erased her, and I knew exactly what that felt like. The kitchen still smelled of lemon peel, brown butter, and something floral probably. That lavender syrup she'd steeped overnight, but it didn't feel like a party anymore. It felt like a wake, a silent goodbye to something that had never been given a real chance. And she just kept wiping that counter over and over. By the time I reached for the dish towel in her hand, she didn't even look up. Ella folded the same dish towel again, smoothing the edges like she was still prepping for guests. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. She kept glancing at the cake, then back to the towel, then to the table where 23 chairs sat in perfect rows. Everything was in its place except the people. I stood near the doorway, unsure whether to speak or just give her space, but it didn't matter. She wasn't really here anymore, not fully. The dining room lights glowed softly against the daffodils she'd picked herself. She said they looked like little trumpets. The cloth napkins were still perfectly folded. Her menus were still lined up in neat stacks on each plate. It looked like a celebration frozen in time, except the air felt thick, like the whole house had held its breath. She moved to the stove, gently opening the oven door. The pear tarts were still warm. She adjusted the tray inside, then closed the door again. Then she did it all over and over. It wasn't about the food anymore, I knew that. She just didn't want to sit still. I walked into the room slowly. "Do you want to sit for a second?" I asked. Ella didn't look up. "The glaze is probably setting too thick," she said. "I should have gone with the honey or orange blossom. Lemon might be too sharp." I didn't say anything back. I just watched her stir a bowl of ganache that didn't need stirring. She kept moving, folding, straightening, checking temperatures. Her hair had started to come loose at the sides, but she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had and didn't care. That was worse. She finally paused long enough to lean against the counter, her fingers resting lightly on the edge. "Maybe they just forgot," she said. "Or maybe Grandma got tired and they changed their minds last minute. It's not personal." I didn't answer. Because it was. She turned slowly toward the kitchen door, looking back at the table again. "It's funny," she said almost under her breath. "I kept picturing Grandma at the end seat. She always pulls the chair out too far. And Uncle Jay always talks over people. And Allison's boys don't eat vegetables, so I made them their own plate. I even made a special risotto for Aunt Maggie. No onion, no pepper. She's allergic, right?" Her voice drifted at the end like she wasn't sure anymore. I took a breath. "Ella?" She shook her head. "I know. It doesn't matter. But it did."
Every
detail she named, every adjustment she made, it all mattered. It had mattered to her. She wiped her hands again, though there was nothing on them. "Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I should have let you help more. Maybe they thought it was too much." I wanted to reach across the room and pull her in, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she stood so still, like one wrong move would make her fall apart. "I just thought," she said, still staring at the table, "if I made it really good, they'd see it. Not me exactly, just what I could do." The way she said it didn't come from bitterness. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. I leaned on the counter beside her. "You did make it really good." She didn't answer. Outside, the porch light clicked on, nothing but wind and an empty driveway. She turned off the oven, then turned it back on again, then off, then back on. Like she couldn't decide what to do. Now that everything she'd planned for was gone. "I should clean up," she said. "We can pack everything up. There's enough Tupperware in the garage, right?" "There is," I said, but she didn't move. I reached for a tray of small hors d'oeuvres she'd prepped earlier, mini toasts with fig and goat cheese, topped with thyme. The kind of thing most 17-year-olds wouldn't even know how to pronounce, let alone make. I took one just to do something. The flavor was perfect. Ella had always had a good palate. She said taste came easier to her than math. "I should have made something simpler," she said. "Pizza or something. Maybe then they would have come." She started pulling dishes from the table, not with anger, just a quiet kind of order. Like clearing a stage after a show no one watched. I stepped into the dining room to help. The chair legs scraped against the floor as I moved them. The sound echoed too loud for a house so full of food and so completely empty. Ella walked in behind me, arms full of cloth napkins. "We can freeze most of this, right?" she asked. "And maybe give some to the neighbors. They won't mind." I nodded. "That's a good idea." She looked down at the cake again. Her masterpiece. The one with the 3 layers and sugared violets she'd candied herself. "Do you think they even remember what day it is?" she asked. "They remember." She swallowed hard. "Okay," and then she picked up a trash bag. That was when I stepped in front of her. Not the cake, she didn't argue. She just set the bag on the floor and walked back into the kitchen. Her steps were light, too light, like she was trying not to leave footprints in her own house. That night, I sat in the dark after she went upstairs. The kitchen was spotless again. Every dish washed, every counter clear. The food was packed away in careful containers labeled in Ella's handwriting. The cake still sat on the counter, untouched. I didn't move it. I thought about calling my parents again, or Allison, but the silence between us had already said everything it needed to say. When I checked on Ella later, her door was cracked. She'd fallen asleep on top of the covers, hair still curled, apron folded on the chair next to her bed. Her phone was face down on the nightstand. I closed the door gently and stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the wall like it might give me an answer. I woke up before the sun, though I hadn't slept much. The house was quiet, too quiet. I padded down the hallway in socks, the floor cold beneath my feet, and stopped in the kitchen doorway. The cake was still there, sitting in the center of the counter like it was waiting for a verdict. The candied violets hadn't wilted, the frosting held its shape. I could still smell lavender and vanilla in the air even after everything had gone cold. Ella hadn't stirred since I checked on her hours ago. I didn't want to wake her yet, not until I figured out what to do. I opened the fridge and saw the rows of containers she'd labeled one by one. Squash tarts, couscous mushroom roulades, even the sugar-free tart she'd made just in case. So much effort, so much thought. And for what? I turned to the dining room, all those chairs we'd arranged, the folded napkins, the little printed menus with gold borders. She'd set each one with care. I thought of her asking if the lighting felt too formal, if the tablecloths looked too stiff. She'd wanted it to feel welcoming, personal. I stood there gripping the back of one chair, and something inside me shifted. I picked up my phone, then I called Will. "Can you come home?"
I asked. "Right now?" he said. "Yes."
"I'll be there in 20. After I hung up, I scrolled through my contacts. My hands shook, just a little. I wasn't sure what I was about to do. I just knew silence wouldn't fix it. I started with Nora from next door, then Becca from work, a couple from the co-op people we hadn't seen in months. Folks who used to wave from porches or bring cookies at the holidays. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. My daughter cooked. For 23 people, I said. They didn't show. "We have more food than we can eat. If you're free, come by." That was it. I sent it as a text to some, called others, left voicemails when I had to. I didn't dress it up. I didn't apologize. By the time we pulled into the driveway, Nora was already at the door. She brought a bottle of red and a bundle of linen napkin rings she thought might come in handy. Then the Thompsons arrived with their 3 kids. Then Becca and her son, with gas station tulips and paper plates. The doorbell kept ringing. One woman I barely knew from a community bake sale last spring showed up holding a container of apple cider and said, "I heard what happened. Tell me where to sit." I stood in the foyer and nodded. "Anywhere you can find a chair." At some point, someone knocked who I hadn't invited. A woman named Devon. She had a camera bag over one shoulder and clay dust on her boots. "I write for the Asheville Chronicle," she said. "Weekend food feature. Mind if I take a few photos?" Before I could answer, Ella appeared in the kitchen doorway. She must have just come downstairs. Her hair was still curled at the ends, and she had a print smudge on one cheek from her pillow. Devon looked at her. "This your work?" Ella didn't speak, just nodded. I turned to Devon. "Go ahead," I said. "But you should taste it too." Devon stayed longer than most. She took notes, tasted every dish. She whispered at one point, "She's better than half the chefs I've reviewed this year. You should tell her that," I said. We had to move furniture by the time the third wave of guests arrived. The coffee table went into the hall. Will dragged in the folding table from the garage and a few chairs from the shed. Someone even offered up 2 camping stools from their car. Ella stood frozen near the kitchen, looking around like the room had transformed while she slept. "Mom," she asked, "what is all this?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm salvaging your dinner. Help me find more chairs." She blinked, then nodded. We set up mismatched tables and laid out the dishes. The cloth napkins didn't match the plates anymore, but nobody seemed to mind. People leaned close together, filling every seat, balancing. Plates on laps and sharing stories like it was Thanksgiving. Ella stayed near the kitchen, wringing her hands. Will brought her a glass of water and put a hand on her shoulder. You've got this, he said. They're here for you. She looked out at the crowd, some familiar faces, some not. But every one of them had shown up when she needed them most. Do I serve now? She asked, barely above a whisper. No, I said gently. You serve your menu. She took a breath, then picked up the first plate, mini butternut squash tarts with sage cream. She made her way around the table, steady, deliberate. By the time the guests lifted their forks, the room fell into that quiet hush that only good food can create.
Murmurs
Followed. Is that nutmeg? This crust is incredible. Wait, a teenager made this? Ella didn't react right away, but I saw the way her shoulders eased just slightly. The way her hands stopped shaking by the third course. The main dish was herbed chicken roulade, stuffed mushrooms, lemon couscous. Plates emptied fast, compliments came quicker. Then, near the end of the meal, a man I didn't know stood up and raised his glass. I don't usually do speeches, he said, but I need to say this. The room quieted. To the young woman who cooked with heart, who fed a room of strangers, not because she had to, but because she could. You've got something special, and I hope this is just the beginning. He raised his glass to the chef, and one by one they all stood. Napkins dropped, chairs scraped. Every single guest rose and clapped. Ella didn't move at first. Her hands were still on the serving spoon. Then she turned to me. I nodded. Tears filled her eyes, but none fell. When someone brought out a backup. Cake store-bought, obviously, the crowd insisted she cut her own instead. She did, and when a little girl tugged her sleeve and asked if she'd cater her birthday, Ella laughed. A real laugh, light, bright, completely her. That night she curled up on the couch, head on my shoulder, apron still on, hair a little messy. She didn't say much, just whispered, I think I finally cooked for the right people. I whispered back, you always did. They just weren't ready. It was just past 2:00 in the morning when the last guest left. The house had gone still again. But this time the silence felt full, not empty. There were tulip stems in the sink, napkins crumpled on laps of chairs, and half the lavender cake cooling on the counter under foil. Ella had fallen asleep on the couch with her head against my shoulder, apron still tied at the back. Her hands were curled at her sides like she was still holding a spoon. I stayed there for a while, listening to the sound of her breathing, soft, even, peaceful. Then came the knock. Not a knock, really. 3 short, sharp hits against the front door, not frantic, not casual, deliberate. I stood up slowly, careful not to wake her, and looked through the front window. My parents were on the porch, matching. Windbreakers, rigid posture. And behind them, standing back with arms folded and a look I knew too well, was Allison. I opened the door, but didn't speak. My father didn't wait. You need to fix this, he said, stepping forward like he owned the entryway. My mother followed. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? Allison was still quiet, her mouth pressed tight, saving her words for when it would sting the most. I didn't move. What I've done. They pushed past me, uninvited, walking straight into the hallway like they hadn't been cut off months ago, like they still had a say. You told the media we abandoned her. My mother snapped. You let that article get printed. I didn't tell anyone anything, I said. A journalist came. She ate the food, she asked what happened, and she wrote what she saw. My father pointed his finger in my direction. You think this is funny? Everyone at church saw it. Our neighbors won't speak to us. My golf group, nothing but silence. I raised one eyebrow. That must be hard. That was when Allison stepped forward, her voice even like she'd practiced it. You need to issue a correction publicly. Say it was misrepresented, say the context was misunderstood. Context? I repeated. Did someone else send that message? From your phone? Did I imagine the charge on my business card? Did Ella hallucinate the photos of you all laughing over dinner while she stood in this kitchen with a handmade cake? My mother's voice cracked. You've made us look like monsters. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You did that yourselves. She just cooked. The words didn't settle. They just seemed to push them further into defense. She humiliated us. She's ungrateful. She used the internet to turn people against their own family. And then my mother turned, her eyes landing on the far end of the hallway. Ella was there, barefoot, wrapped in one of Will's sweaters, her face still soft from sleep. "You should be ashamed of yourself," my mother said. I didn't remember crossing the floor, but suddenly I was between them, my back to my child. Will appeared at the top of the steps just then, holding two of the folding chairs we'd borrowed earlier. He didn't speak at first. He just took one look at Ella's face, then at mine, and came down without hesitation. "You need to leave," he said calmly. My father scoffed. "This is a family matter." Will didn't blink. "And this is our home. You don't get to show up in the middle of the night to yell at a 17-year-old girl who made you dinner." My parents stood, frozen for a second too long. Then Allison turned, muttered something about legal action, and walked out the door. My parents followed. Slam. Silence. Behind me, Ella hadn't moved, but her breathing had shifted. Slower, deeper. "Mom," she whispered. I turned. She pointed across the street. Jeff, our neighbor, was standing on his lawn, phone in hand, still recording. By morning, the video was already posted in the local Facebook group. The title read, "Those grandparents from the Teen Chef story just showed up screaming at her doorstep." It had been shared over 300 times by noon. The comments came in waves. "Who yells at a kid over a cake? This poor girl deserves better. This is why people go no contact with family. I'd be lucky if my daughter could cook like that." I stirred Ella's cocoa while scrolling through them, half distracted by the flood of messages. She sat curled on the couch, no apron now, just a blanket and a distant look. Her hair still smelled of vanilla and thyme. Before I blocked them, I saw the last text from my parents. "You've ruined us. We'll take legal action if you don't correct this."
This is
Elder abuse. I didn't respond. I blocked them. All three, Mom, Dad, and Allison, along with the group chat they always used to control the narrative. Then I opened my business account and deleted the card they had used to pay for their dinner. That particular access would never happen again. I posted just one thing on my own page. "We stand by every word and we're done protecting people who hurt our daughter." I thought we might get backlash. But what we got was something else entirely. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Encouragement came from strangers. A chef from a small bistro downtown sent a message inviting Ella to shadow in their kitchen over the summer. And then a comment came through on the article from the Charleston Culinary Academy. The one Ella had dreamt about since she was 14. "We've heard of Ella. We'll be watching her journey." She stared at the screen like it might disappear. Then, she whispered, "They saw me." And that was the moment something cracked open. Not in the way she'd broken before, but in a way that let light in. It happened exactly 1 year later, almost to the hour. Late afternoon light spilling in through the kitchen windows. The same wooden counter where Ella had once placed those candied citrus slices. She was chopping rosemary for a catering box she designed herself, roasted lamb skewers, lemon potatoes, a fresh fig tart. Her playlist was on low. Her apron was clean this time, pressed with her name embroidered across the chest. Will and I were folding delivery boxes at the dining table when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it once, kept chopping. Then she looked again. Her hand stopped moving. "Mom," she said quietly, "it's from Charleston." She didn't breathe for a full second, then she tapped the screen. I moved beside her but didn't say a word. Her eyes scanned the email slowly, line by line. Then she turned to me, barely whispering, "I got in." I stared at her, not fully registering it. "Full scholarship," she added, still holding the knife in one hand, like she hadn't decided whether to cry or keep chopping herbs. She sat down right there on the kitchen stool, reading the message again, like it might vanish if she looked away. I sat across from her. Will leaned in from the doorway. We didn't cheer. We didn't shout. It didn't feel like a parade. It felt like a door had opened somewhere quiet and far. And light was finally reaching us. The program was one she'd only dreamed about. Charleston Culinary Academy. Not just admission first year, full ride. She'd applied months earlier, never telling me she hit submit. She said if she didn't get in, she didn't want to make it anyone else's disappointment. I found out later she had written the application. Essay about that dinner, the one nobody came to. She didn't focus on the betrayal. She wrote about the meal, the work, the joy, what it meant to cook with intention, what it meant to be seen. That summer, before she left, she started getting private orders, tastings, wedding dinners, seasonal boxes. A retired teacher across town ordered her chocolate tart every Sunday for church potlucks. A young couple asked her to cater their engagement party. The local bistro that had offered her a stage? They ended up featuring her in their newsletter, calling her a rising voice in Southern flavor storytelling. She launched a blog, posted recipes, plating photos, little behind-the-scenes clips of her stirring ganache or pulling bread out of the oven. People started commenting, then following. The page grew fast, but she stayed steady, measured. She never chased attention. She just shared what she loved. Every few weeks, someone from the school sent a note, "Keep it up, Ella." Or, "We're watching your progress." One even sent a handwritten card, "You've got hands that tell a story." That one she framed. We never heard another word from my parents or from Allison. I'd blocked them, and they never reached out through any other channel. Word spread though. I know it did. They moved 2 towns over that spring. Someone mentioned they'd told friends it was for a quieter lifestyle. But I knew the real reason. Too many neighbors had stopped inviting them to things. Too many polite silences. Too many, "Sorry, we're busy that weekend" messages from the same people who used to host them every month. One woman from church, a woman I barely knew, sent me a message that said, "I didn't know the whole story until I read the article. I'm sorry I ever believed otherwise." We didn't reply to most of the notes, not because we didn't appreciate them, but because we didn't need to. Ella kept going, focused on her work, on getting ready. We didn't do a big party that year. No long guest list, no cake stands, no folded menus. When her birthday rolled around, we sat in the backyard with paper plates and string lights, just the 3 of us. She grilled the lamb herself, roasted the potatoes, made a tart from figs she'd picked that morning with the neighbor's granddaughter. The air was soft, the sky clear. No music, just quiet chewing and the occasional laugh. She looked up from her plate once and smirked. "No guest count to stress over," I smiled. "No seating chart either." Will raised his cup of sparkling cider. No drama. We clinked our glasses. Ella leaned back in her chair, hands still a little sticky from the fig syrup, and said mostly to herself, "This might be the best birthday dinner I've ever cooked." She meant it. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't styled for photos, but it was hers, entirely hers. I didn't need to ask if she thought about them. I knew she did. I did too. But not in the way that used to sting. Not in the way that tightened the chest. There was no ache, just space. They had taken their silence and filled it with judgment. She had taken that silence and built something better. It was early September when we dropped Ella off at Charleston Culinary Academy. The air still held the weight of summer, but there were hints of fall, cooler mornings, softer light through the trees. She packed carefully, not much beyond essentials, a set of good knives, a binder full of recipes, a folded printout of her first blog post, still creased down the center from reading it too many times. Her apron hung in the back seat, already washed and ironed, the fabric just slightly faded from use. Will drove. I sat in the passenger seat, hands wrapped around a thermos I'd barely sipped. Ella didn't say much, just watched the road, fingers tapping out a rhythm against her knee. When we arrived, the checking was smooth. She signed her name, got her key, picked up a welcome packet, and a plain white chef's coat with the school crest stitched on the sleeve. She didn't put it on right away, just held it against her side and walked with quiet steps up to her dorm room. We helped her unpack, but only a little. She wanted to do most of it herself. A small stack of cookbooks went on the shelf, her journal in the top drawer. By the time we left, the room still looked sparse, but she didn't seem nervous. "Just ready. I'll call after class tomorrow," she said, giving me a hug that lasted longer than usual. Don't wait up. We didn't? But I kept the phone nearby that night anyway. The weeks that followed settled into something steady. She messaged often, sometimes with full updates. Sometimes just a photo of a plate she'd made garnished with fennel or petals or the exact right smear of sauce. Her instructors liked her. She got invited to a competitive weekend staging series, small kitchen rotations for second years and visiting alumni. She started talking about plating balance like it was poetry. And when she sent me a video of her recreating the lemon glaze from that night, the one she'd once made for my mother, I watched it twice before bed, then again the next morning. By October, her blog had taken off. Not viral exactly, but noticed. Local chefs reposted her short clips. One regional food magazine shared a piece titled, "The Girl Who Turned Rejection into Flavor." She didn't share the article right away. I saw it through someone else. When I brought it up, she smiled and said, "It's not really about me. It's about the work." But the attention meant something else too. Not everyone had forgotten. One evening, just before dinner, I checked our front porch and saw a cream-colored envelope tucked under the mat. No return address, just my name written. In that familiar narrow script I hadn't seen in a year. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a short note in my mother's handwriting. "We miss you. Let's talk soon. It's time to move on." No apology, no mention of Ella, no acknowledgement of what had happened. I left it on the table. Will picked it up, read it once, and said, "You want me to shred it?" I nodded. He didn't ask again. A week later, Ella got an email from Allison. "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've come a long way. Maybe we could reconnect sometime. Family's important." Ella forwarded it to me with one sentence typed below. "Is this real?" I didn't answer right away. Later that night, as we FaceTimed during one of her prep breaks, I asked how she felt about it. She paused, then shrugged. "I think they're just hoping people forgot." That was all she said. She went back to chopping radishes while I watched her through the screen. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair tied back. She looked older, not in age, but in something else. A kind of clarity that doesn't come from time, but from choosing not to carry things anymore. She didn't respond to the email. Neither did I, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I saw something online. A woman I barely knew had shared a post something vague about how stories can be exaggerated and how there are always two sides. Underneath, someone had commented, "Is this about that teen chef? Her parents did nothing wrong." There was no proof, no names, just enough shade to try and tilt the story. I didn't reply publicly. I didn't start anything. But I did something else. I pulled up the original article, the one Devin had written, and shared it again. I added one sentence. Some stories don't need correction, just memory. Ella liked the post, nothing more. But a few hours later, I saw she'd posted a recipe with a caption that made me pause. It read, "For the ones who show up always." That weekend, she returned home for a visit. Just a short one. We grilled in the backyard again, same as before. Figs, rosemary, a loaf of sourdough she'd made that morning in the campus oven. As we ate, the topic of her grandparents came up. She didn't flinch. "They can move on," she said, pouring sparkling cider into our glasses. "But they don't get to revise what happened." We toasted no clink, just a quiet raise of our cups. The next day, she packed up and returned to school. I stood in the driveway a while after she left, watching the taillights fade. A full year passed just like that. The seasons turned again and Charleston warmed into spring. Ella finished her first year with top marks, 2 mentor recommendations, and more private clients than she could have imagined. Her blog was steady, her work consistent. There was no rush in her success, no spotlight chasing her down, just a quiet building. One dish, one post, one dinner at a time. She came home for a weekend in May, not for a holiday or an event, just to be home. No guest list, no meal plan, no audience. She brought lemons and rosemary from the market, a fresh wedge of local cheese wrapped in brown paper, and 2 jars of spice fig preserves she'd made in the school kitchen. That evening, we sat on the back patio under the string lights Will had put up last fall. Nothing fancy, just a wooden table, a cast iron pan warming on the grill, and 3 plates set without much thought. She grilled lamb, tossed potatoes in. Olive oil and sea salt and spooned fig jam onto thick slices of toast she browned over an open flame. It was the best thing I'd eaten in months. At one point, she looked up from her plate and smiled. No folding chairs to return this time, Will chuckled. I reached for my cider. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been felt. We stayed out long after the dishes were cleared, just the three of us. The air smelled of thyme and smoke. And somewhere down the block, someone was playing an old record through open windows. She didn't talk about her grandparents or the article or the night that started all of this. But I knew she remembered. I did too. Not out of pain anymore, but out of understanding. They never reached out again. Never said they were sorry, never returned the money they used. They wanted to move on, but not to reconcile, just to rewrite. They're part of the story, but it wasn't their story anymore. It was hers. And now, every time she walks into a kitchen with her name stitched on her coat, every time someone sits down to eat something she made with her own hands, she takes it. Back quietly, fully, not to prove anything, just to live fully in what was always hers. We never planned another big dinner. There was no need, because that first night, the one they tried to erase, wasn't the end. It was the beginning. She stopped asking to be seen and started building spaces where she already was. And me? I stopped making space for people who needed my silence to feel comfortable. Sometimes I still get messages from strangers who read the article or saw the video. They say, "You were brave to stand up for her." Or, "I wish someone had done that for me." But the truth is, I wasn't brave. I was simply done making excuses. Done teaching my daughter that love is something you earn by being small. Because real peace isn't quiet. It's knowing who belongs at your table and choosing them every time. If you're still listening, thank you. If this reminded you of someone, or if you've ever had to reclaim your seat at the table, feel free to share your story. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. There's always more room for stories like this.